Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, we've been doing a video series here about maintaining and managing your Linux Mint system. Of course, we've done a lot of reviews about basically using it. We've done a lot of things about how to install it. I thought it'd be good in light of Windows shutting down its whole Windows 10 thing soon. By that, I mean no more security updates without paying for it. That we should get more content out about managing your Linux Mint system. And so I want to go ahead and have a brief look here at our Linux kernels today. So Linux itself, you might go in and get in some deep philosophical discussion that says, technically it's GNU Linux. And what that basically means is Linux is the actual operating system, but Linux is just a bunch of lines, a bunch of code, a bunch of things running on the background. GNU is the user interface. It's this beautiful thing we're looking at that allows you to draw windows and use software and do all sorts of cool stuff. But there are, at any given time, sometimes several different versions of the Linux kernel. The kernel is what allows the system to run. So if you go into the Update Manager, which we are up to date, that's good news. And you go on down into your history, or excuse me, your Linux kernels down here, you can see that there are different kernels installed. So on this particular system, you can see all these ones, they say superseded. This means that these kernel versions are available in the system, but they're really not here because they're old, they're out of date, they've been security patched, so they're not installed. So we still have this one installed, and these will show up kind of as their release security updates. So what's kind of installed here is generally the version since I've done the last updates. So we were probably running on the 59, and then we just did the updates in a recent video, and then this gave us this one was installed. So here is where the reason some of these older ones are left on. And a good example, because my other laptop, we had a kernel update that actually kind of broke the display drivers. So that laptop operated perfectly fine. But if I plugged it into an HDMI cable to run it on my main monitor, which I oftentimes do in here to dock these and use my standard screens, there was a problem with that Linux kernel version that broke that display port, and it just wouldn't quite work right. And it was a little bit on the frustrating side. I'm like, what is going on? And then I remember we just did an update in the system. So what I did is I came into here and I rolled back. So here's the way this works. If you boot up a Linux system, you will see that screen. It's called Grub. Some different Linux distributions use a different one, but it will give you, it'll say Start Linux Mint in this case. And there's another option that says Advanced Options. If you go down into that Advanced Options, what you're actually seeing is all of these previous versions of Linux that are available to actually view, actually install into. So if I were to install into one of those, then it would say installed and active if I had selected this one here. This way, if there's some problem with this latest kernel, I can always roll back to the previous. So what I did on my other computer is, with that being a problem, when the latest was active, and it wasn't the 6.8 branch, it was like a 5.15 branch. So I pulled in, I loaded the system up, and I said, I bet that's the problem. So I go back into the advanced options, and then I ran with the previous one, which in this case would be this 059. And then I pulled this up here and I removed it. Now I can't remove it right now because it's active, but I could remove this one, or I could remove this one. Now I've been using this one for a while and I know it works. And what I'm actually going to do is I can remove the kernel. So I'm going to go ahead and mark remove. And then this is going to remove this old kernel. So that is what is being removed. So you'll see it's removing the headers, the generic, the image, the modules. So these are all the things that make the system work. So I go ahead and hit this, and it's going to give me a password prompt, so it's going to be removing those individual kernels. So the next time we get into here, that one is not going to be there. So I'm going to keep this old 0859 in case I notice any problems. I can roll back to it, and then I'll keep that 60. I generally on this, I keep usually just one extra kernel. I'll keep my main active, and then I'll keep one previous one there as well. Now, if I wanted to, so I'm on the 6.8 branch right now. If this computer were more edge later hardware, I might want to move up to this kernel here. But what you'll notice here is that this one says it's supported until August of 2025. That's only a couple months from now. Whereas this 6.8 says supported until April of 2029. That's because the 6.8 branch is called an LTS, or a long-term support, or long-term stable. It's one of those. I think it stands for long-term support. And that means that this kernel will get security patches, but it will not actually get a lot of new features. So if my computer is working perfectly fine on 6.8, I'm going to go ahead and keep it here. If there's some weird reason that I want to use a newer version, I might roll up to this one if I'm noticing some software support. But you'll notice that this one eventually is going to stop being supported soon, and then Linux Mint is going to add this in and a new one in, and then I just have to keep on upgrading my kernel a whole lot more. That's why their approach generally has been to use an LTS kernel with the option to use these. Now, if I wanted to install this, I would click on this and I would hit install. It would install it, and then it would do, every time you adjust the kernels, it will update that grub menu system. And then this, being the latest kernel, would be the default that is run. So I'd want to test it out, but of course I can still go back into the old ones. But that is how you manage and change your kernel versions. I'm just, of course, not going to update that here. So there is a little bit about managing your kernels. Let me actually show you where these live. So on this system, it might be slightly different because this is an encrypted system, but I think it's running the same. If I go into my file system here and I find this boot folder, this is actually where those kernels live. So here is that 860. Here is that 859. So this is actually where all those kernels are. Now, this is the computer that it used to have a really, really small partition for these kernels, and it wasn't. There was an older version of Linux Mint that did not properly remove the old kernels from out of here. And so I run into a couple times a few years ago where this thing completely filled up and broke the computer. So I did a whole video about how I fixed that. So you might like that if you're interested in the Linux kernels with a little bit more information. But this really is where that is. And in that case, for a while, just until that system got patched, I was just in here manually deleting the old files, which actually worked just fine. So there is your information about your kernels. Leave us your thoughts on this video in the comments down below. Let me know other tips and tricks you're interested in Linux Mint. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.